Part 8 Chapter 36. At least it's dry. Tuya's head was aching, and he was trembling from how cold he felt, something he had gotten used to the past couple of days from the illness he caught, so he buried himself into the nice soft pillow. Subconsciously he noted, albeit distantly, that something about the previous thought wasn't right, and though thinking made his head hurt, he tried to find what was wrong with the situation. Because as far as Tuya could tell in his state, he was just lying in his bed and pretty sure he never wanted to catch the flu ever again. Maybe it was the blanket cause it felt softer than his, perhaps Fuyumi had given him her blanket, but that didn't make sense. How would Fuyumi find him this far from Musutafu? And why would she be looking for him after being dead for 7 years now? It was that last thought that jogged his foggy memory onto the fact that he could not be in his bed, and it set off alarms in his head. Tuya should be on his bare soggy mattress and feel bone cold because of the gaping holes all over the warehouse he'd taken residence in. He struggled to sit up, and not just because he was sick, but because a good part of him didn't want to leave the bed since it felt so good where he was. He had just managed to push himself upright when someone put a hand on his shoulder and gently stopped him, freaking Tuya out since he hadn't opened his eyes yet. Light sensitivity sucked, but he should have risked the headache just to make sure he wasn't alone. Hey. Don't try to get up yet, you're not doing so well, hun. His terror ebbed slightly upon hearing Magna's voice. He was still freaked out, but having someone he kind of knew helped a bit. Red? He croaked, trying to open his eyes. Yeah, kiddo, it's me. Just try to calm down. Do you need anything? She asked, removing her hand from his shoulder just as he got over his light sensitivity. With his vision returned, he could see Magna wasn't in the best shape herself. She was sitting on the bed in a stained tank top, sweatpants, and her hair in a messy bun. Then his gaze went over the room they were in and noted two things. It was pretty bare outside of the bed. There was a chair and bedside table, and it was a good thing he hadn't opened his eyes cause the room was mostly white. The fuck are we? He questioned, searching his groggy brain for what could have happened. He was coming up empty cause the last thing he could remember was trying to get some sleep after she helped him back to his building. Magna hesitated, looking away from him. Somewhere safe. I was worried. You didn't look good, and I couldn't just leave you like that, hun. I came back to check on you, but well, someone else did first. She explained, and that helped him to recall some bits of a blurry figure, but he still couldn't remember shit. My new boss, the kid I mentioned. Yeah. He saw how bad off you were and had me drive us here. She told him. Tuya was going to again ask just where. Here was when the door to the room opened and some preteen greenette entered with a tray of food. Upon locking eyes, the memories of what happened hit Tuya like a truck, including the part where he tried to bluff the kid into leaving and subsequently got a bucket of slush to the face for his troubles. Ah, you're up, he commented. Good. Let's check your temperature, Deku said, placing the tray down on the side table and grabbing a thermometer off of it. Tuya scowled back at the boy as he approached. Don't come near me, why? He growled, only to gag as Deku stuck the device in his mouth. I woke up at 1 a.m. to catch a train to check on you. It's 5 a.m. now, so I'm running on 3 hours of sleep, and I haven't eaten anything since last night. Deku cheerfully told him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and in your state, you couldn't fight off a toddler. He added, giving off a much more sinister vibe than Tuya thought the boy could be capable of. Maybe it was the kid's quirk. So, I highly suggest that you stop trying my patience, considering I've gone out of my way to get you somewhere to recover. Now close your mouth. He instructed, and reluctantly Tuya closed his mouth, shooting a look at Magna. Unfortunately, she looked just as taken aback by the boy's demeanor. Thank you, Deku said with a sigh, his threatening aura dissipating, but Tuya didn't let his guard down. There was a beep and Deku removed the thermometer to check the temperature and hummed, 18.3 C, that's better. He muttered, placing it aside, 18 C. Magna hissed, looking horrified, but Deku waved her concerns off. Considering he was around 16.6 C when he got here, this is a vast improvement, one that is to be expected given the nature of his quirk. He replied offhandedly. That made Magna look between the two of them, rather lost. But I thought you had a fire quirk? She said, looking at him confused. I do. He snapped, but his body is built for an ice quirk. Deku commented, rooting through the drawer for something. Tuya felt his heart jump into his throat. How did you? He trailed off shocked because how did this kid know that? What else could he know about him? The kid rolled his eyes but didn't turn his attention away from what he was doing. If your body wasn't built for it, you'd be dead already. And even if I wasn't familiar with ice quirked bodies, your scars make it pretty clear you inherited a strong ice quirk from someone. He answered, pointing to the large, purple-tinted scar on his forearm. While Tuya could understand the temperature thing, but his scars? What about my scars? He questioned, unsure what the greenette was implying. He didn't like not knowing what others were talking about. Instead of replying right away, the boy stopped what he was doing to roll up his sleeve and showed his forearm to both of them while pointing to 5 small patches of discolored skin with multiple small red or black specks in the middle of each oval of bleached skin. It wasn't a pretty sight and looked disturbingly like fingerprints. This is what third-degree burn scars look like. Those, however, Deku said, then he pointed to one of Tuya's burn scars, are ice burns, which always happen whenever someone with an ice quirk gets burned due to the biological makeup necessary for safely housing an ice quirk. The degree of the burns varies from person to person due to the strength of the ice quirk and how bad the burn itself is. Yours are third degree, bordering fourth ice burns, no doubt from pushing the boundaries of your antithesis quirk. He explained, and for the most part both could follow along. A what quirk? Magna asked in his place, and he was glad he wasn't the only one confused by the term. They received a patient smile in return as Deku pulled his sleeve down again. I apologize, Magna-san. I tend to forget most people aren't well versed in quirk science outside of the bare minimum. He apologetically told them, and Tuya was surprised there wasn't much arrogance in his voice, and he would know considering how his sperm donor was capable of surrounding himself with people as bad as himself. I'm sure you know the 3 quirk types: transformation, emitter, and mutation. But quirks also fall into one of 3 categories: Old World, Antithesis, or New World. Deku explained, causing Tuya to become lost because in all the time his sperm donor talked about quirks, he's never heard of quirk categories. Contrary to popular belief, every quirk is usually 2 quirks combined. A primary quirk that allows the abnormal ability, and the secondary quirk. The way the primary and secondary interact with each other is what places them in either Antithesis or New World. He told them, going back to the drawer and pulling out a jar of something. New World is what most people think when they think of quirks nowadays. Someone has a primary quirk, fire for example, and a secondary quirk that protects their body from fire to a certain degree. He elaborated as he opened the jar and stepped closer to the bed again. Tuya shifted to move away, but there was only so far he could go with a wall behind him. Antithesis quirks, on the other hand, are where the primary and secondary quirks have a negative reaction to each other that can cause severe damage to their holder without proper training or support, like how your fire quirk leaves ice burns when you exceed your limits because your secondary quirk only gives you a degree of invulnerability to the cold. Deku finished off saying as he pulled out some goop from the jar and proceeded to rub it on Tuya's arm. And for all Tuya didn't trust the kid, he only let the boy continue rubbing the goop on him because whatever it was made his scar tissue feel looser, for lack of a better word. He could move his arm and it didn't feel like he had to force his skin to stretch itself out, his ability to fight the kid off in his current state notwithstanding. Magna-san, could you make him some soup since he's up now? He requested as he finished rubbing whatever the goop was into his scar tissue and turned away to wipe his hands off on some wipes also on the tray. Magna met his eyes silently asking if he wanted her to stay, and Tuya found himself not dreading the idea even if he still felt unease about being alone with this kid. The boy was kind of like his brother and he was enough of an egghead he felt reasonably safe with him. So, he gave Red the go-ahead and Magna hesitantly exited the room and left the 2 of them alone. These should help with your cold. Do you need something to drink to help you get them down? Deku questioned, grabbing a bottle of pills and getting out 2 small white tablets. Tuya quickly clocked the label before deciding whether or not to accept random drugs from a stranger. Nah. He rasped and the boy put the pills in his hand and let him swallow them before Deku spoke again. My friend is going to let you stay here until you get better. Do you have any idea what you'll do after that? He inquired. Tuya scowled back at him. What's it to you? He questioned, giving him a dirty look, being as grateful as he could be to the kid for kidnapping him, but he wasn't going to just blab his plans to the brat, temporary roof over his head or not. Deku remained unfazed by his actions. Considering I'm planning on offering you a job, I think I'm entitled to know if you at least have a roof over your head. The boy responded, crossing his arms as he leaned back into the chair. Tuya blinked, then stared at him for a solid minute. What? He said, because there was no way he heard him right. Deku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I am quite lenient about my clientele, and I don't particularly care what they do on their time, but that doesn't make me naive of what other people do when I'm not around. And the respect I've cultivated only grants me a certain amount of clout. The boy admitted with an odd pause when he mentioned respect. Despite being called a failure from birth by his sperm donor, Tuya wasn't a total idiot and had heard bits and pieces of the mysterious Deku Sensei, but he was still having trouble reconciling with this kid being that Deku Sensei, mainly because he was warned about crossing him and that didn't line up with the brat. Mostly, if he did have some kind of secret emotion influence quirk, then he'd be more receptive of the idea. So, to keep my areas a bit safer, I've been thinking about finding someone to keep an eye on my territories in the south side when I'm not there. It would also help discourage others from starting something if I had someone that can fight to back me up. Someone like you. Deku told him, and if I don't want anything to do with your shit? Tuya scoffed back at the coincidental timing of it. Then we go our separate ways once you've recovered, no strings attached. You staying here is a favor for Magna-san. He answered with a shrug, and Tuya wasn't assured by his nonchalant. And just what would I get for working for you, Deku? He sarcastically asked, and the boy brought his hand to his face as he thought with a hum. Does 3,904 yen a day sound good? He offered. The fuck, are you serious? Tuya replied, starting at the kid like he was a two-headed alien. Would 5,210 yen be better? Deku questioned with a raised eyebrow. You're serious? He muttered. Deku shrugged again. 156,300 yen a month doesn't sound too bad of a price for keeping my people safe. The boy commented. You don't even know me, and you want to hire me to be some off-brand hero? Tuya questioned, almost spitting the last word. Magna-san can vouch for you. That's enough for me. Besides, you can't be worse than any of the other heroes that have visited the south side. Deku responded, and Tuya noted the bitterness in the second sentence. Deku stood up and moved to the door. I don't need an answer now. You can take your time to think about it. I'll be back later, so it will be just you and Magna-san for the rest of the day. See you then, Scar. He told him as he left the room and left Tuya to process everything that had just happened in the last 15 minutes? Getting kidnapped by a kid, learned that he was one of many with a shitty quirk, and was offered a job by his kidnapper who could not be older than his baby brother. Tuya felt his head was pounding from trying to grasp all of this, but at least he was going to eat soon and had a soft bed to sleep his cold off in. Chapter 37. Meeting Mrs. Hakiishi. Magna can say that working in the South Side had been interesting to say the least. Sure, she was used to dodging sketchy figures, having worked her fair share of jobs in red light districts, but running the Minty Delights bakery was very different from all of her other positions. She had been an unofficial boss a couple of times, but this time she was the boss in name, title, pay, and all, so she had to do was spend some time getting an idea of what her new business needed before she could think about opening. There were obviously some kinks she had to work out when it came to employees and getting the day-to-day operation up and going, but little Midori-chan had been a great help through it all, surprisingly. She hadn't had to worry about getting ingredients or having them restocked. Simply write a list for the boy and he'd have someone get what she needed. Being under the boy's payroll also gave herself some leeway with the locals, herself being an outsider or not. Magna is pretty sure that is why she's been mostly left alone by the troublemakers. The boy's hand-drawn map of the district helped in that regard too. The work itself wasn't the most challenging, considering she had a decent time baking all of the treats and the two kids working under her were competent enough. She got a decent amount of customers since starting up, with some regulars coming in once or twice a week. She also was given a lot of autonomy since Midori-chan was only able to check in on Fridays. But he was always available by phone if there was an emergency, which the kid wasn't joking about, as she learned last week. Thank God, because Dobby had been worse than she thought he was, and Dobby definitely needed that fireproof place to recover. While she'd been taking care of him, she was able to badger the poor guy into staying with her until he found a new place. Dobby was a respectable roommate and tried hard to find some work to cover his part of the bills once she reluctantly let him search for a job. The boy hit a lot of roadblocks with his complete lack of previous work history or proper identification, and of course, his appearance made it impossible to find one. Dobby's stubborn insistence that he had to earn his keep eventually caused him to break and take Midori-chan's offer the day before yesterday. Magna hadn't known about the kid's offer but tried her best to reassure Dobby that Midori-chan likely wouldn't take advantage of him. Probably, he didn't seem like the type from what everyone told her. Today was Dobby's first day of probation, and trying out his new role of peacekeeper. He wasn't under contract yet and Midori-chan wanted Dobby to give his job a try before locking him into a contract, but the Greenette assured them both that he would be paid for his probation period as well and forwarded a map with instructions of what Dobby was expected to do. It was pretty straightforward duties-wise, as all it entailed was that Dobby patrolled the south side, bouncing between each business or property Midori-chan owned, check in with the people there, and keeping an eye out for any kids he saw during his daily meandering. And of course, if he did see anyone causing trouble, well. Midori-chan's buildings were all privately owned, so Dobby had Midori-chan's permission to use his quirk how he saw fit, so long as there wasn't any outrageous property damage or casualties. So with all this in mind, Magna made sure to bake Dobby's favorite cookies so he could have them when he eventually popped by. She led him to the district that morning but hadn't seen him since then. Magna tried to keep from worrying about him too much or else she'd be likely to stress bake all of their stock. It was a relief that Dobby finally strolled in around noon. The guy looked exhausted but he was in one piece and she didn't clock any funny movements. "Hey there, hun. I was worried you were gonna try avoiding me," she teased, coming around the counter to the little table that Dobby chose to collapse at. "That brat's trying to kill me," he grumbled back at her, his face buried in his arms. Magna pat him on the back. "Your first day not going that well, hun?" she asked, and he gave her a look. "I've been running around in circles because that brat has his business all over the district. And of course, I can't just go from point A to point B because of all the gangs roaming this shithole," he spat in response. She gave an understanding hum. The south side was loaded with gangs and she had her own trouble avoiding them in the beginning. She couldn't imagine how much more difficult it would be if she was as underweight as Dobby is, much less when winter was in full swing as it was now. "I know it sucks, hun, but it's better not to mess with the locals until you make a name for yourself. Midori-chan only has so much sway around here," she told him. Dobby gave her the stink eye. "I don't need that brat to protect me," he huffily replied, and she could swear it was his equivalent of pouting. Magna chuckled over his childish behavior and ruffled his black hair. "Sure you don't, kiddo," she teased, and Dobby proceeded to try and smack her hand away from him. "Don't call me that. I'm over 20 years old. I'm not a kid," he maturely protested, making her playfully roll her eyes. "So you say, but until you can prove it you're always gonna just be a kid to me," Magna said. Dobby groaned and buried his face in his arms again. "Everything's been fine here, hun, but feel free to stay as long as you need, kiddo, and I've made you a little snack for your trouble," she told him, dropping a baggie of cookies in front of him. Dobby's eyes lit up and he eagerly pulled out one to gobble it up like the little goblin he was, making her chuckle again. She turned away and was moving back to the counter when she heard the soft jingle from the doorbell. "Welcome to Minty Delights. How can I?" she greeted, turning towards the entrance only for her brain to crash when she saw who was there. Because there was no way that her mother would ever be caught dead anywhere near a place like the South Side on principle, much less be standing inside the district. But no, the longer she stared at the well-dressed woman, the clearer it became that she was standing in the shop and that she wanted to be anywhere else from the disgruntled look on her face. Magna felt she should have known that they might have shown up to make a scene at her work. It has happened twice before, but she didn't think either of them would be so crazy as to travel across Japan to confront her in person in a red light district. Her mother, ever the aggressor, took charge and marched over to her, scowl firmly in place on her face. "Kenji, it's high time you stop with this childish tantrum of yours and come home," she spat, and Magna took a step back, a familiar twist in her gut once she heard her old name. Dobby was on his feet and would have intervened if she hadn't quietly motioned for him to not. "Mother, we've talked about this. You can't just barge into my life or my work whenever you feel like it. And that's not my name anymore. I had it changed years ago. Magna tersely replied, trying her best to not give Mother the emotional response the woman wanted. Mother pursed her lips. Perhaps I wouldn't have to go to such extreme measures if my son wasn't acting so irrationally. She coldly told her. Mother glanced down at her clothes and her face twisted in disgust, no doubt at her clothes. Magna wasn't wearing a dress today, but she was wearing pastel colors that her parents absolutely would have never let her have under their roof. The frilly pastel apron no doubt wasn't helping matters. How long do you plan to continue this absurd rebellion of yours, Kenji? You're 26 now. You don't have much time left to find a good job and a decent woman. You shouldn't be wasting the prime of your life on this foolishness, much less in a place like this. She questioned, rudely gesturing to the wrecked area outside the shop window. Magna's fists clenched. She was used to her parents looking down on her and her life choices, but after spending a decent amount of time with the people who lived in the South Side, she couldn't help feeling personally insulted. Not everyone that lived there was a criminal or some drug addict. She's met a couple of good people here who just were in a shitty situation, one she could easily be in if she wasn't as lucky. I'm not wasting my life by being who I am or doing what makes me happy with people who support me. And until you can understand that, I want nothing to do with you. Either of you. She firmly said, crossing her arms. The other woman scoffed and was going to continue her rant when someone cleared their throat behind her. Excuse me. A familiar young voice called, and when her mother moved she saw little Midori-chan standing there. Magna felt her face start burning, embarrassed at being caught fighting with her mother, and was worried that the woman was going to cause her problems at her job. Again. The boy didn't look annoyed at least, but as his eyes locked onto Mother she felt her anxiety rise. Is there a problem here, miss? Midori-chan asked, his tone oddly neutral. This is a private matter and none of your business, boy. Mother sneered back at him. To Midori-chan's credit, he didn't react to her aggressive demeanor, though in retrospect Magna doubted her mother could be as scary as any of the criminals she knows he's associated with. Considering I'm the owner of this bakery, I believe I am more than entitled to ask why you're disrupting my employee's shift. He blatant replied, his voice flat. Her mother's face was fully scowling now. Even if you were the owner of this pathetic business, you have no right to butt into a private family matter between myself and my son. She hissed back, and Midori-chan blinked, looking slightly confused. Magna began to feel even more embarrassed and upset with how entitled her mother felt she was to her life. But she wasn't surprised, and she was going to apologize, but he spoke first, confusing the other three in the room. I thought Magna-san was an only child? Then his eyes widened and he smiled, though Magna swore it was different from the one she was used to seeing. Ah, I suppose congratulations are in order on your new sibling Magna-san. If you'd like to take some time off to help them at home, I understand. After all, it must have been a difficult pregnancy at your mother's age. He sweetly offered, making her mother's face turn almost as red as her hair while Dobby snorted. However, dread began to pool in Magna's gut because her mother's infertility was an incredibly sore spot for the woman. And as she feared, her mother lashed out, as she always did whenever her fertility was brought up. How dare you? Her mother shrieked, and before anyone could do anything the woman slapped Midori-chan so hard the boy lost his footing. Back the fuck off. Dobby shouted, immediately putting himself between the woman and Midori-chan when her mother tried to step closer to the boy, then set his hand on fire when Mother tried to step closer. Go ahead, bitch. Try me. He spat, glaring at the woman, but Magna was more focused on the greenette in her panic to properly hear her mother's cry of offense. Magna had moved to check on the poor boy, only for Midori-chan to suddenly catch himself from his fall by his hand suddenly grabbing the chair behind him, and his face turned back to her mother and gave her an unimpressed look. Despite the clear handprint on the greenette's face, he only looked slightly irritated. Miss, I believe it's time you leave. He calmly told her mother, gently pushing her to stand behind Dobby, the pyro quickly getting in front of her the rest of the way. Her mother scoffed and was going to speak, but Midori-chan cut her off. That was not a suggestion, Hakiishi. As the owner of this business, I am telling you to leave, and if you won't, I'll have my security escort you out. He firmly said, motioning to Dobby, who happily waggled his fingers that were still on fire. Her red-faced mother's skin managed to finally match her hair. Now you listen here, you. She snarled only for Midori-chan to pull out his phone and show her a video that made her fall silent, and it took Magna a moment to understand what she was seeing herself. But then it looped and she realized it was a muted recording of her mother aggressively speaking to Midori-chan before striking him hard and cut off when he started to fall. The video had to have been taken by someone outside through the large bakery storefront window, given the angle that it was clearly her mother and Midori-chan. Magna turned to look outside but didn't see anyone where the cameraman should have been. Midori-chan gave a soft hum. I wonder what the school board would say if they saw this, Hakiishi? He pondered out loud, and while Mother lost a lot of the wind in her sails, she wasn't backing down, as if they'd ever listen to a disrespectful brat like you. She spat and Midori-chan smiled back at her. I'm sure they won't, but if this got leaked to every news station in Japan? I can see the headlines now. Beloved and respected high school teacher caught on camera assaulting a poor defenseless boy. Do you think they'll stand beside you when a mob of angry parents comes demanding your head, Hakiishi Junko? Midori-chan proposed, looking her mother dead in the eye, and that made the woman pale. The threat, while mostly unsaid, was very clear, and Magna couldn't believe what was happening. Midori-chan stepped towards her mother. The thing about living off of a reputation is how easy it is for everything to be taken away from you. So, Mrs. Hakiishi, I think you should go home to your husband before you do something you can't come back from. He sternly advised and left the air thick with tension. Her mother was furious, and Magna didn't need a mind-reading quirk to tell the woman wanted to curse Midori-chan out. Mother did have a brain, however. Instead she huffed, storming off, taking the tension away with her, and as soon as the woman was out of sight, Midori-chan's shoulders slumped, his posture returning to the concerned nature she had come to know the boy by. He turned to her. Are you all right, Magna-san? He softly asked, and if she was being honest, she wasn't. Having Mother randomly show up in her life was always stressful and admittedly left her an emotional mess. Today probably wasn't going to be an exception, but she could have that existential crisis when the day was over with the help of a cheap bottle of wine. Right now, though, she was way more concerned about the bruise blossoming on the boy's face. I'm not the person who just got hit. Are you okay, Mido? She questioned back, her hand unconsciously going to cup the injured cheek, but it stopped halfway, not wanting to cross a line. To be fair to Magna's worries, her mother's fingernails apparently scratched the boy bad enough to draw blood, and 3 drops were building upon his cheek. Midori-chan's eyes flicked down to his cheek as if he could see it without a mirror before they went back to her. It's fine, Magna-san. I can handle some discomfort to keep my people safe. He simply assured, and Magna, of course, noticed his inclusion of her being one of his people, though Dabi, who wasn't as familiar with the boy, scoffed. Since when is a slap that knocks you off your feet and draws blood count as discomfort? He inquired, his arms crossed. The boy shrugged. I've been struck harder by toddlers. You'll find most of us 2 toes are a touch more durable than the average person. Midori-chan explained, adding air quotes when he said average, but Magna was sure she wasn't alone in her confusion over what a 2 toes was, but chose not to ask about it just yet. Compared to a girl I knew when I was 7 and the way she used to throw me around with her strength quirk, this, he pointedly poked the bruise without flinching, is nothing compared to what I've been through. So please don't blame yourself for it. Either of you. Midori-chan told them, but it was hardly comforting to hear the boy admit he was so used to being assaulted. Magna couldn't help feeling guilty that her narrow-minded mother was the one to harm the boy and was now worried about the boy's past, well, more worried since he was mixed up with a lot of criminal groups. Dabi didn't look like he was taking it any better. You're paying me to shut that shit down before it escalates to that. Dabi spat, gesturing to Midori-chan's bruised scar. I hired you to take care of things when I'm not here. I don't expect you to, or want you to throw yourself into every fight. He calmly corrected. Dabi gave a huff. I've told you not to call me that. My name's Dabi. He half-heartedly complained, and Midori-chan hummed back. Perhaps you should have thought of that when you threatened to barbecue me. I did say I'd call you Scar if you wouldn't give me a name. Midori-chan dryly replied, what are you even doing here? Aren't you only supposed to be here at 3? Dabi questioned, changing the subject. Since the Southsiders tend to be naturally distrustful of outsiders, I figured it would be best to have you follow me around so I can introduce you. I can do my online courses at any time. Midori-chan simply explained, brushing it off. Dobby's eye twitched. I don't need some green twink babying me, he told him, making Midori-chan roll his eyes. The two continued to bicker almost playfully, which helped to drain a majority of the tension left over in her body from the confrontation. Watching the two of them certainly eased Magna's mind a bit, but not entirely. She wasn't the smartest person, or that observant, so it was only by chance that she realized Midori-chan was more affected than he let on. After all, the shaking of his tightly clenched hands was very minor and almost invisible with how his arms were crossed. Maybe she was reaching given she hasn't known the boy for long, but the way he held himself felt tenser than he usually was. And that did hurt on some level for the woman, that she needed the kid to force himself through his anxiety to protect her from her own family. But on the other hand, knowing someone so paradoxically powerful had her back to the point he'd take a blow for her sake was grounding, in a way she's never had in her life before, and something she knew she shouldn't take for granted. Chapter 38. Kaori adopts a new Ani-chan. Kaori smiled as she walked home with her friends, Kiku-chan and Aki-chan. She didn't go to school like her friends because she had Ani-chan and Midoriya-chan to teach her, but she loved to go to her friends' school and walk with them back. She got to see so many things she'd never see where she lived. Like the street signs that hung over the roads. Ani-chan told her they were supposed to change colors, but she has never seen what colors before, or so many buildings without the pretty markings she's seen her downstairs neighbors do occasionally. There were even things like pretty flowers and some duckies in a pond once back in spring, and it was like she was walking through a whole other world. Even when it was really cold and there was snow everywhere, it was so pretty. So even though she didn't like leaving the house during winter because of how sleepy and slow it made her and the rest of her family, Kaori still loved walking with her friends. But wintertime had been better since Midoriya-chan brought them all big fluffy clothes that were so much warmer. She couldn't help but grin and snuggle into the collar of her coat to warm up her cheeks and keep herself awake. They were only halfway home, and she needed to be awake enough to not get hit by a car or a bus. That was another thing she noticed when walking with her friends. There were way more cars and buses than she thought ever existed. Though to be fair to her, Aki-chan's story about all the things she learned today was super cool, and she couldn't wait to ask Midoriya-chan all about it next week. She had to know if flamingos were pink because they ate so much shrimp. If so, does that mean she could grow blue scales when she was older if she ate a ton of blueberries? She hoped so, because she'd love to have blue scales. Well, she'd love to have scales in general, so she'd look less weird and more like the people around her. But blue scales would make her look so pretty. And she told her friends as much. Maybe, but wouldn't you have orange, black, or white like your family? Aki-chan pondered, one of her long antennae flicking more wildly. Kaori-chan pouted at that. She wouldn't mind having scales like Ani-chan or Papa, but she would still like to have blue scales. Kiku-chan shrugged. I don't know, Deku Sensei should though. You would look nice with blue ones, Kaori-chan. He told them, and Kaori instantly cheered up and hugged the monochrome boy. Kiku-chan's arms shot up to the air to keep his quirk from activating. Thanks, Kiku-chan, she said, making his face turn grayish. That made the two girls giggle, as Kiku-chan was acting like how Midoriya-chan used to when he first started helping Ani-chan. The three had to stop as they reached a crossing, and when they looked for cars, Kaori spotted someone shivering in an alleyway. The sight wasn't something odd, but the thing that stood out to the young girl was that the person had scales all over, just like Ani-chan. Of course, Kaori had to meet this person because she had never met anyone that was fully scaled other than Ani-chan. So once it was safe, Kaori rushed across the street to go say hi to the person. Kaori-chan. Aki-chan cried when she had left them behind. Standing in front of the person, Kaori noticed a few things about the reptilian person she hadn't been able to see from across the street, like how they had pink hair hidden under the hood covering most of the person's face. She didn't know fully scaled people like Ani-chan could also have hair too. Did her brother have hair once? She must have surprised them because she could see their wide pink eyes, and Kaori couldn't help being envious of the other person. After all, their eyes were her favorite shade of pink. She was also curious if the person had cold blood like Ani-chan did, because Midoriya-chan said most fully scaled people do, and the person wasn't properly dressed for winter if they were. She knew she had been staring at the person for a while, so she decided to speak. "Hi, what's your name?" She politely asked, and the person sluggishly blinked at her and then answered with a bit of confusion, "Iguchi." The person sounded like a boy to her, but she was more concerned about how he slurred his name. He sounded just like Oni-chan did when he got too cold, and his eyes had the weird look too. She frowned, walking closer and rubbing her mittens against the boy's face. Iguchi-chan flinched back but leaned into her hands when he understood what she was doing and let her warm his face. "Kaori-chan." Aki-chan called, and Kaori looked over her shoulder to see her two friends had caught up to her. "I found someone like Oni-chan. His name is Iguchi-chan," she told them, and her two friends approached Iguchi-chan. Her friends both examined the sleepy, green-scaled boy that was letting Kaori try to warm him up with her gloves. "Why does Iguchi-chan look so sleepy?" Kiku-chan asked. "Is he sick?" Aki-chan inquired, leaning in and letting her antennae repeatedly tap against Iguchi-chan's face as she always did when she thought someone was sick. Considering that Iguchi-chan could hardly keep his pretty pink eyes open, she understood why they were both concerned about her new friend. "I don't think so. I think Iguchi-chan has cold blood like Ani-chan, and Midoriya-chan said people with cold blood always get sleepy when they're cold. We probably just have to get Iguchi-chan somewhere warmer, and he'll wake up." Kaori told them, feeling disappointed she couldn't help him before she gasped as she had the greatest idea. "Ani-chan has a special blanket to keep him from being super sleepy. We just have to get Iguchi-chan to my house, and he'll wake up," she cheerfully exclaimed. Kaori took one of Iguchi-chan's clawed hands and tried to pull him up. "Come on, Iguchi-chan. Follow us," she told him, and even though Iguchi-chan was sleepy, he managed to shakily get to his feet after Kaori's prompting. "That's it. This way, Iguchi-chan," she instructed, gently leading the boy to the sidewalk. "Kaori-chan, are you really going to take this guy home with you?" Kiku-chan whispered, his gaze going from her to the boy trudging along with them. Kaori smiled, nodding, "Of course. Papa's still at work and Ani-chan wouldn't mind sharing his special blanket. He lets me sleep in his bed all winter sometimes," she answered, adjusting her grip on Iguchi-chan's hand so he wouldn't get any colder. They didn't have far to go, but Iguchi-chan didn't have any gloves, and she was sure it was because of his claws. It took Midoriya-chan a while to find good gloves for Ani-chan. The last thing Shuichi could remember before his hindbrain had forcibly taken over was trying to find somewhere warm to stay for the night. It was all hazy after that, and he couldn't remember anything from that time, even if he wanted to. His hindbrain wasn't going to waste the energy to make any memories when it needed to conserve all the resources it had left. So, when he woke up, Shuichi was understandably frightened when he realized that he was in someone's room. He looked all over for any sign of what could have happened during his fugue state, and while he hadn't felt anything other than the usual tight pinching all over and a headache from being unconscious, that didn't mean something hadn't happened to him. The dingy room admittedly wasn't much help with how bare it was. A couple of boxes with books on top of them, the large mattress he was currently sitting on, and a door that presumably led to somewhere else. None of this helped Shuichi, but he could at least think straight again thanks to a very large and warm electric blanket that had been draped over him. As much as he didn't want to stick around for whoever lured him, the chill in the air and the idea of becoming unconscious again frightened him. The door opened suddenly, and he wasn't sure what to think when a young blonde girl with slit eyes peeked inside. "Iguchi-chan, you're awake." The little girl cheered, running over to him. Did he know this girl? This girl knew his name, but he couldn't remember the girl for the life of him. She didn't seem very dangerous as she beamed up at him. "Even with 4 sharp tiny fangs, I knew Ani-chan's special blanket would help you. It always helps Ani-chan when he gets sleepy," the girl told him with a little giggle. She probably meant the electric blanket that covered him, and Shuichi wondered if he had somehow lucked out in being found by someone with reptile mutations and they had taken pity on him. It wouldn't be the first time he's found a sympathetic shoulder from another mutant-quirked individual, and just as he was about to ask the girl, another figure far more intimidating entered the room. Despite the multiple layers of clothes, he could tell the scaled figure was likely much stronger than him from his much larger frame. The person was even crouching slightly to keep their head hitting the patchy ceiling. Most of their face was covered, but he could see two piercing golden eyes staring at him intently, making Shuichi feel incredibly small where he sat. Ani-chan. Look, I found someone with scales like you. His name is Iguchi-chan. The girl exclaimed excitedly as she threw herself at the towering figure. Ani-chan's eyes flicked down to the little girl, making grabby hands at him, and he surprised Shuichi by kneeling and pulling down the thick scarf covering his similarly reptilian-shaped face. Kaori, you shouldn't bring strangers home just because they have scales. He softly explained, if a bit flatly due to his monotone voice. But Ani-chan, Iguchi-chan was all sleepy like you used to get. And he doesn't have one of the big fluffy coats Midoriya-chan got us. Kaori protested, getting a trill-like hum in return before his eyes were on Shuichi again. I apologize for the scare. My sister no doubt gave you Iguchi-san. She's mostly warm-blooded and has never had a hindbrain take over. He told Shuichi, his lisp more pronounced as he spoke. It's fine, really. Shuichi replied, pausing as he didn't catch the man's name, Miyaki Masao. The other reptile mutant provided for him and then placed his backpack by the door. Do you have someone we can call to get you Iguchi-san? Miyaki asked, sitting next to the mattress. Shuichi curled in upon himself and averted his eyes, and no. He answered, and it wasn't a lie either. The foster family he was staying with had kicked him out since he was 18, now. He wasn't though, he had only turned 17 last August. But his foster family very much didn't give a damn and tossed him out the morning of his birthday since he was an adult, now. Kaori tilted her head at that. You don't have any family? She innocently questioned the way most toddlers do when they didn't know better. Well. No. Shuichi painfully admitted. His father had been very clear he never wanted to see Shuichi again. Kaori blinked, then her eyes went wide. Does that mean we can adopt you, Iguchi-chan? She gleefully asked, shocking Shuichi and Miyaki. Kaori. Miyaki tried to speak, but the little girl cut him off. Do you know what that means, Ani-chan? I'll have two Ani-chans. Oh. Iguchi-chan, can I call you Igu-chan? Or should I call you Oni-chan? Kaori said, practically bouncing from her sheer joy at the idea. Shuichi himself felt rather overwhelmed by the little girl's energy, and the idea of being adopted stung a bit since it would be really unlikely to happen. Kaori. Miyaki repeated a touch more sternly, and the girl stopped and turned back to the man. Even if father agrees to let Iguchi-san live with us, we can't force him to stay. Masao laid it out for the young girl, and Kaori deflated. But he can. Right, Ani-chan? She asked, close to pleading, but before Masao could answer her, a second, no less intimidating man entered the room. Masao stiffened. Papa? Kaori called, but Shuichi was more focused on the man's fierce glare at him. The man's tongue flicked out and his eyes furrowed. Boy, he said, and Shuichi felt his body tense up. You're Acacia's brat. The man added, his words more of a statement than a question, and a large part of Shuichi wondered how this man knew his mom's name. Let me guess. Acacia kicked the bucket, and your old man didn't want the extra mouth to feed. The oldest Miyaki continued to correctly surmise about his family, but Shuichi flinched at the last bit, as that was one of the things his father had said to him all those years ago. Miyaki Tsked warned that dumb bitch not to stay with that bastard. You got a name, brat? He questioned, scaled arms crossed as he leaned against the doorframe. Iguchi Shuichi. Shuichi timidly offered, and Miyaki nodded. Right. Hatchlings, help the brat get settled. Miyaki told the siblings before he left, and Shuichi was going to ask what the man meant by that, only to be interrupted by Masao. I think father agrees we're keeping Iguchi-san. He commented, causing Kaori to cheer and hug him. Chapter 39. Alleys, Backrooms and Stitches. Izuku had a relatively calmer winter this year despite his traveling. Though it wasn't that high of a bar considering the SSI that happened last year. There were some hero fights and other incidents, but nothing of that scale, if only because Endeavor hadn't come near any of the districts. His shops had been doing surprisingly well because Izuku's alias had left most people believing his places were the safest place to get what they needed without leaving the south side, or without paying what would be a ton of money for them to get the bare minimum. He wasn't making that much money, but his mom and Auntie Mitsuchan helped him to balance his finances. Auntie and uncle had also greatly helped with getting his business license, which felt way easier to get than Izuku thought it should be. However, if people were going to leave such big loopholes for others to abuse, well, what was just one more thing in his favor? Izuku tried his best to keep up to date with the owners of his little businesses just in case he needed to step in. His employees also kept him in the loop about what was happening in the district the rest of the week, which is how he knew Dabi was settling into his new position with little difficulty. Well, Dabi still needed to work on taking care of himself, but Izuku had already started working on a training program for his quirk so Dabi wouldn't hurt himself as much, but until Dabi was willing to come to him or forced Izuku's hand, he would reluctantly give the guy his space. But according to a message from the 100 yen store owner, the Miyakis had taken in a new lizard boy, one he was looking forward to meeting today as he sat on the bullet train to Niigata. He had heard bits and pieces of this new guy from various people, including Mezzo-kun, as he and Masao-san did know each other. Iguchi-san sounded like a good kid and was doing a bunch of odd jobs for some of his businesses, so he'd like to thank him in person. Izuku was looking forward to seeing Mezzo-kun's quirk progress as well, since the boy had told him he had a breakthrough with his quirk. Mezzo-kun had insisted on showing Izuku in person, so he didn't know what Mezzo-kun was going to show him. So, he excitedly approached the south side with more energy than normal, though his attention was quickly grabbed by some commotion in an alleyway. Such things were more like background noise to him now, but he recognized one of the voices in the squabble. Dabi was fighting someone and Izuku decided to just check what was going on and make sure Dabi hadn't gotten in over his head. He stealthily made his way over to the mouth of the alley and peeked inside, and his heart skipped a beat. Dabi stood across from some threatening man with long black claws instead of fingers. Dabi had bright blue flames covering his forearms and was likely using this to keep the clawed man away from not only him but the two people cowering behind him. A scaly green guy he figured was Iguchi-san, and Iguchi-san was shielding a terrified young boy with similar-looking claws. "This is your last chance to fuck off before I fry your bony ass, you bastard." Dabi hissed, venom dripping from his voice, and Izuku knew Dabi was being serious as there were already scorch marks in the alley around the three. The clawed man scoffed something back at Dabi, but it went through one ear and out the other for Izuku as he swiftly crept behind the man. With his taser in hand, Izuku quickly brought it up and, for the very first time, fired the weapon. The man jolted for a few seconds before he fell to the ground unconscious at Izuku's feet. The four stared at each other for a second, then at the unconscious man, then back at each other. Izuku was as equally shocked at his own actions because he had moved without thinking. But he couldn't say he regretted it, if only because Dabi wouldn't kill someone in front of the boy. Izuku took a deep breath. "Is everyone all right?" Izuku asked, moving closer to the three. Dabi huffed, letting his flames go out. "We're fine, brat. Zilla and I stepped in before he could hurt the kid." Dabi answered, jabbing a thumb back at Iguchi-san and the crying child. Iguchi-san gave Dabi a look at that comment, and Izuku strongly suspected he knew why. The blood and ripped-up clothes on Dabi's left side weren't subtle in any context, and his scars were irritated. "We'll talk about this later, Scar," Izuku tersely informed Dabi before switching his attention to Iguchi-san and the young boy he was shielding. The boy looked considerably less scared now that the man was unconscious, but he was still pressed against Iguchi-san. Izuku crouched down to the boy. "Hello, little one. My name is Deku Sensei. Can you tell me what your name is?" he softly asked, watching as the boy's eyes briefly lit up upon hearing his alias, Tobi. The boy answered, struggling with his Japanese, which was painfully obvious, and Izuku wondered if the boy was English. "Tobi's a lovely name. Do you think you can tell me what happened, Tobi-chan?" Izuku asked, switching over to English flawlessly. Tobi-chan looked so relieved once he changed to the other language, but the boy's mood soured, and he looked utterly gutted. "It was my fault. I shouldn't have snuck out," Tobi-chan told him, tearing up and hiccuping. "Oh, Tobi-chan, I seriously doubt that. Just tell me everything that happened, okay, kiddo?" Izuku implored, offering his hand to Tobi-chan. The boy hesitantly placed his clawed hand in Izuku's. I wanted T to speak Japanese better, so I was going to come to T the lessons I heard people next door talk about. But Papa said I couldn't leave, so I snuck out and he caught me. Toby-chan explained through sniffles and finally burst into tears. Papa was so mad and his yelling G got their attention. Then the scarred man started fighting with Papa and N. Toby-chan had to stop speaking as he got fully choked up. Izuku smiled patiently at the boy and slowly placed a hand on Toby-chan's head. It's okay, Toby-chan. You shouldn't have left like you did, but your papa shouldn't have yelled at you either. He did something wrong, and that's why Dabi and Iguchi-san stepped in to stop him from doing something bad. Izuku assured the boy, why don't we go to see some of my friends? I'm sure they wouldn't mind watching you for a while, Toby-chan. Izuku redirected, purposely shifting the boy's attention. But Papa's so mad at me. He'd never let me stay. Toby-chan whimpered into Izuku's chest, not fighting Izuku in any fashion when he picked Toby-chan up. Don't worry about that, Toby-chan. I'll talk with Papa about everything. Izuku responded with a pat on the boy's head, his ominous meaning only lost on the young boy. Izuku took a few seconds to motion for Dabi and Iguchi-san to follow him before he started to leave the alley, spinning small stories to the young boy to keep his attention on himself rather than on Dabi's injury. Toby-chan had been nervous when Izuku left him at the community center, but Izuku was sure that the other kids would help ease his fear. With the child safe, Izuku's focus reoriented onto the brunette, stubbornly pretending he wasn't hurt. Yeah. No, Izuku wasn't going to let that slide and grabbed Dabi by the arm and then dragged him towards one of the back rooms nearby. Dabi, of course, tried to fight it, but his injury made him too weak to struggle, and Izuku had a very firm grip on Dabi's arm. Iguchi-san nervously trailed behind both of them. The guy's worry about Dabi overruling his apparent anxiety over Izuku. Something Izuku was very reluctant to admit was maybe not an irrational fear to have. Back rooms were common enough in the worst districts, and Izuku had frequented them to the point he could easily work in one completely blind. Once he forced Dabi to sit down on the old cot. Izuku hadn't needed to look to find the scissors. Hey! What do you think you're doing, Twink? Dabi exclaimed, trying to scoot away from Izuku. This reaction didn't help Iguchi-san's nerves. Izuku held back a sigh. I'm not an idiot, Scar. Your shirt and jacket are trashed and need to come off. He calmly explained as he moved closer to the scarred boy. Dabi was about to argue but grimaced and his hand went to his injured side. Scar, just let me help. Izuku flatly told Dabi. Blue eyes immediately darted away from Izuku, and he stopped moving. Thank you, Dabi. Izuku softly said as he gently took Dabi's shirt and began to cut it so it could be removed along with the jacket. Without the clothes, Izuku could see 3 cuts and 2 gashes. The cuts would just need to be cleaned and bandaged, but the 2 gashes would need stitches. Iguchi-san, could you get me the white box under the sink over there? Izuku requested, pointing toward where the items should be. Izuku pulled the leftover cloth from Dabi's wounds while he waited for Iguchi-san to bring what he needed. Iguchi-san fumbled for a couple of minutes before giving the box over to Izuku. Thanks, Iguchi-san. Could you also bring the trash can over? Izuku requested as he pulled out a rag and the antiseptic from the box. Why, yeah. Of course. Iguchi-san timidly replied. Izuku dosed the rag, then began to clean Dabi's cuts. Motherfucker. Dabi hissed, jolting away from Izuku. I know it burns, Scar, but this is necessary to prevent you from getting sepsis. Izuku, apologetic, told him as he continued to wipe the area clean. The antiseptic was much stronger than most over-the-counter antiseptics, and he knew it hurt much worse too. This next part is going to hurt, but you need to stay as still as possible. Izuku warned, putting aside the rag and grabbing the threaded needle, then dipping it into the antiseptic. Dabi tensed and turned his head away and had a white-knuckled grip on the cot. Izuku put on some gloves and moved so he'd be at a better angle to stitch up the 2 gashes. Izuku carefully started the first row of stitches and Dabi jumped, spitting curses under his breath as he tried desperately not to move. Izuku bit his lip but focused solely on making sure he didn't hurt Dabi any more than necessary as he continued to stitch Dabi up. I'm almost done, Scar. Just a couple more and we're done. Izuku assured, having already stitched up the first gash and nearly finished with the second in seconds. Dabi gritted his teeth and nodded, showing he understood. Izuku finished with practiced efficiency and gave the area another cleaning before placing bandages on the area. There, all done. Pain meds are in the cabinet over there, Iguchi-san. Izuku told the two as he removed his bloody gloves, purposely giving Iguchi-san something to do since the guy had been standing off to the side stewing in his anxiety. The scaled man had jumped at the opportunity and was rifling through the cabinet. I don't need no damned pills. Dabi protested, though he wasn't particularly convincing, with his hand clenching his side, red bottle labeled with a black hair tie. Izuku commented pointedly, ignoring Dabi's glare as he cleaned up the box and the used medical supplies. Iguchi-san found the bottle not long after Izuku described it and timidly offered it to Izuku, who smiled at him in turn. Thank you, Iguchi-san. Now if you'd please? Izuku asked, taking 2 pills and offering them to Dabi. The brunette stubbornly held out in hesitation for a few seconds before he downed both pills. I doubt I need to ask you for the details of what happened, Scar. It seems pretty cut and dry. Izuku commented, crossing his arms. Dabi's face twisted into something rather dark. The kid ain't going back. Dabi hissed, practicality seething from the idea, and Izuku couldn't help feeling insulted that Dabi would ever think that he'd let Tobi-chan go back, and I'll make sure he won't. Izuku flatly replied, and Dabi did look partially pacified by that. Izuku grabbed a new shirt and jacket for Dabi and handed them over to the brunette before turning to Iguchi-san. I'm sorry, Iguchi-san. This isn't quite how I wanted us to meet. Izuku apologized and offered his hand. My name's Midoriya Izuku. He introduced himself and Iguchi-san timidly shook his hand. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-san. Iguchi-san said, about as nervous as a cat on a tin roof. Izuku smiled back at him. I've heard many good things about you, Iguchi-san. Quinn-san in particular praised you for fixing his register. Izuku mentioned, and Iguchi-san nervously rubbed his neck and looked away. That wasn't anything big. IJ just pressed a couple of buttons. Iguchi-san brushed it off, but Izuku had to disagree. He knew how difficult the register was to operate, as he had to help Quinn-san with the machine in the past. Maybe, but you're good with technology, right, Iguchi-san? Izuku questioned, and the guy shifted from one foot to another. I wouldn't say that. I just know a thing or two. Iguchi-san mumbled. Izuku hummed back. Would you like to know more, Iguchi-san? Izuku inquired with his head tilted, and Iguchi-san stared back at him. What? Iguchi-san responded in shock. I could help you get enrolled in college for technology. Or help you find a vocational school, Iguchi-san. Izuku answered simply. You would do that? Iguchi-san hesitantly asked, and Izuku nodded. Of course. We can talk more about this later when you've thought about it some. Izuku replied. He wrote his number down for the guy and handed it over to Iguchi-san. Here's my number so you can give me your answer later. Until then though, could you give me a hand forcing Dabi to Minty Delights? I've already texted Magna-san about this and she's going to watch him. Izuku requested, at which point Dabi protested. I ain't a dumbass, you green twink. And I don't need a fucking babysitter. I'm 21. Dabi spat, but he was being ignored by both of them. You sure? Iguchi-san answered uncertainly. Thanks, Iguchi-san. Izuku replied with a soft clap, and Dabi's eye twitched. Hey. Don't you ignore me, you Twinkie. Dabi shouted, swiping at Izuku, who easily dodged. Chapter 40. Masao makes a friend. Masao has never had a clear idea of what he wanted in his life other than food and a warm bed, something his father had struggled to provide for both him and his sister, and despite his father's attempt to put him through school, Masao was probably going to end up entangled in the same gang his father used to run with. That was until October of '71, when Kaori had taken it upon herself to find someone to help him with his homework, which was probably what set him off on a completely different path in life when he met Midoriya Izuku, a nervous bundle of pure energy and knowledge that changed everyone he's ever met. Continuing his education after middle school wasn't something he entertained before meeting the Greenette, but having spent so much time with the boy and watching him grow to the point of having some level of confidence in his abilities was indescribable. When the end of his senior year came around and his teachers were encouraging their year to think about their career choices, Masao didn't know what he wanted to do. He wasn't ambitious in any sense of the word, and his quirk made a good deal of jobs unavailable because of physical inability or quirkism. Talking with the counselor both did not and did help him pin down what he wanted to be. The woman was lazy and quirkist, so she didn't give Masao any real help, but while she was spewing the company lines, he did get an idea of what he wanted to be. Someone Midoriya-san could look up to and respect. Midoriya-san was an incredible judge of character most of the time, and the people he used to look up to the most were heroes when they first met. The Southside Inferno had changed that, and while Midoriya-san's feelings towards heroes were unclear, there were professional heroes he still held dear. Gang Orca, Present Mike, and the Wild Wild Pussycats were the first to come to his mind, mainly because Midoriya-san would routinely praise them for their charity and community work. Midoriya-san respected those people for doing so much for people on top of tiring and dangerous hero work. Masao has never desired anything other than food before, but the idea of being someone Midoriya-san could respect was the closest thing to what he wanted to be. So, he looked into hero schools to see how possible it would be to join one. His only concern would be tuition or getting to the school building, but hero schools had scholarship programs in most countries including Japan. There were even a few that gave full-ride scholarships under certain circumstances. But out of all the schools he looked at, one stood out amongst the rest. The famous UA. Being All Might's alma mater was only a token title at most to him, and it was highly competitive regardless of the course, but it gave full rides and had one of the highest graduate survival rates since the current principal took over. Being in Musutafu was a problem, but he could probably work something out with Midoriya-san's help if he got in. So, on the chilly morning of February 26th, Masao got himself bundled up and on the first of 3 trains he'd ride to get to UA. His middle school wasn't the most supportive of him, but he did get his hands on the mock exam so he could practice for the entrance exam. He could have asked Midoriya-san for help, and the Greenette no doubt would have been his biggest supporter. Midoriya-san would undoubtedly work himself to the bone to get Masao into any hero school Masao wanted to get into, and as much as he would appreciate the support, Masao wanted to do this on his merit. If he wasn't fit to be a hero on his own, he didn't want to force himself to be one. So other than father, no one knew Masao was standing in front of the UA building that morning. Perhaps if Masao was more emotional, he'd be intimidated by the grand building, but as it was, he couldn't say he cared more than that the building had doors and ceilings high enough for him to not need to duck down to walk inside. Being a 7-foot-tall lizard man got Masao a lot of looks from the other examinees, though he hardly cared about that and tried to focus solely on his written exam. Sadly, growing up in the South Side conditioned Masao to always be hyper-aware of anyone's eyes being on him. On the plus side though, after a grueling 2 hours of trying his best to answer each question on the test, he had been mildly surprised when Present Mike came out to explain the practical test of the exam. Well, he knew Present Mike taught here, but he didn't think that someone as busy as the blonde would have the time to be an examiner on top of his other 2 jobs. But it was a pleasant surprise, and he pondered if he could get an autograph from Midoriya-san. The Greenette deserved to get nice things, and Present Mike's autograph would be a great gift for him. The instructions themselves weren't too difficult to follow and seemed ridiculously simple considering it was supposedly approved by the principal. It felt way too easy and open-ended as a test for heroics, but Masao could understand after a touch more thought. On the surface, it blatantly favored flashy quirks, but that was only if one focused on the shallow end of it. The 0-pointers were likely to represent an enemy that couldn't be easily conquered and show how examinees reacted in critical situations. And of course, Masao didn't see any rules against teaming up with other examinees in the pamphlet. After Present Mike finished up his energetic explanation, Masao followed the rest of the examinees outside, grabbing a numbered card on the way out from one of the many ectoplasm clones that had previously helped with the written exam. Masao found himself in test group 4 and moved over to the bus with the same number printed on it. While waiting for the rest of the examinees to sort themselves out, Masao noticed 2 people out of the corner of his eye. An energetic blonde was trying to calm a boy with elf ears. The latter was shaking and looked to be seconds away from vomiting. Masao was only able to catch part of what the blonde was saying as the 2 approached. Worry too much, Sunny. Just try to breathe and do what comes naturally. All you have to do is remember what you learned in practice, and you'll be a shoo-in for the hero course. The blonde encouraged, not that it helped, Sunny, much as he ducked his head and mumbled something Masao couldn't catch. The blonde gave the elven boy a kind smile. I know being on your own will be scary, Sunny. Rules are rules. But I'm sure you'll be fine, Sunny. You'll probably even meet some friendly people. And no matter what happens, we'll get your favorite afterward. Okay? The blonde tried to assure the elven boy. Sunny shrank in upon himself as he watched the blonde walk toward another group. Masao was far from the most curious person in the world, but this Sunny certainly held his curiosity now. Sunny could probably tell he was being stared at, but that didn't stop Masao from watching Sunny stewing in anxiety for the entire ride to the test area. Sunny reminded Masao so much of Midoriya-san when they first met, terrified and muttering to himself. It was interesting to see in person, especially after meeting someone like Midoriya-san. The other examinees were openly dismissive of Sunny, seeing how shaken the guy was and not thinking he could possibly be a threat. Masao, however, having seen Midoriya-san's evolution firsthand, knew better. Tamaki currently found himself between wanting to throw up or fainting, wondering how Mirio ever convinced him to try out for UA's hero course. He knew Mirio was ambitious, but did he need to try out for UA? There were plenty of good hero schools closer to where they lived that weren't as competitive or flashy. While Tamaki always looked up to Mirio for his courage, ambition, and confidence. He would very much like to know why he was being dragged along for the ride. Sure, he wanted to be a hero alongside Mirio, and being in the same school would be fantastic, but there was no way they'd both get into UA. He had no doubt he bombed the written test, and there was no way he could make up for it in the practical test. And to top it all off, there was this tall person with a lizard quirk that wouldn't stop staring at him. Tamaki has never had a problem with mutant quirks, but this person was creeping him out because he had no idea what he'd done to get the person's sole undivided attention. He was desperately trying not to freak out on the ride to the exam grounds. But that was kind of hard when that person wouldn't stop staring right at him. Tamaki thought that he might have gotten away from the rest of the examinees after they reached the exam grounds, and he moved as far away from the crowd as he could. He had just found someplace to curl up and cry when someone spoke up behind him. Hey! Tamaki jumped, and turning he saw the lizard person looming over him, scary. Run. Hide. His mind loudly chanted, but Tamaki was unfortunately paralyzed with fear. Do you want to team up? They asked suddenly, and Tamaki's brain stalled. WWA. Tamaki questioned barely above a whisper. Did he hear the other person, right? I want to work with you during the exam. The other elaborated, not that it helped Tamaki's confusion. W with me. He croaked out shakily, pointing to himself, and the intimidating figure nodded. Tamaki tried to wrap his head around this person wanting to work with him of all people, but he couldn't. Mirio told him that other potential hero students would be nicer than most people, but Tamaki didn't think any of them would work with him. Was teaming up even allowed? Yes. The person flatly told him, making Tamaki jolt and cover his mouth, cursing himself for being so embarrassing as to mutter to himself out loud, "It's fine." Do you want to team up? The lizard repeated, and Tamaki couldn't help feeling put on the spot. Why yes? Tamaki squeaked out, and the other knelt to his level. Okay. Here's my plan. We can get points by immobilizing the robots as well as points for destroying them. I'll hold them down, which will give me points, and then you can destroy them for your points. The guy laid out for Tamaki. Tamaki could follow along with most of his logic. He was less intimidated when the guy wasn't looming overhead. Will you need a weapon, or can you use your quirk to destroy the robots? He asked, and Tamaki fumbled for an answer. Mirio had helped him eat a lot of foods before the exam, but he didn't know how any of them would be useful against robots. I don't think my quirk W would. Tamaki stuttered out, shamefully ducking his head and covering his head with his arms. The other made an odd reptilian noise. Okay, I'll get you a weapon. Just jump on my back and hold on. The other replied, and Tamaki balked. WA. Tamaki cried, but before he could question it, the large gates of the exam area opened. His new teammate suddenly jumped onto all fours behind him and jammed his head between Tamaki's legs. Tamaki shrieked as he slid down to his partner's back, then his teammate dashed off towards the entrance with Tamaki clinging to him tightly. Tamaki was internally losing it while praying his teammate didn't get them both hurt, his eyes squeezed shut as his partner weaved through the miniature cityscape. After a few seconds, they came to a stop in an alley with his teammate letting Tamaki off of his back, and he subsequently melted into a puddle on the ground. While Tamaki was gathering himself, his teammate jumped upon the fire escape before he ripped off one of the poles. Tamaki had about 2 seconds to marvel at the other's strength before he jumped down and offered the black pipe to him. Oh. That's what he meant by a weapon. Tamaki dumbly thought as he timidly took the pipe. Come, let's find some robots, his partner told him. He wrapped the end of his tail around Tamaki's wrist and dragged him along to the end of the alley where his partner stood for a few seconds. There's one. Aim for the eye, he told Tamaki before could say anything. The other dashed off and Tamaki watched in awe as his partner proceeded to restrain a large robot with bold yellow tubes painted on its legs. The robot was struggling, but his partner kept it mostly where it stood as it tried to get his partner off its back. Tamaki watched for another few seconds before he remembered what his partner told him to do, and he moved closer, gripping the pipe tightly. His partner must have noticed Tamaki's careful approach and wrapped a thick arm around the robot's eye stalk, before suddenly flipping the entire machine over. Now upside down, Tamaki had much better access to the large red eye as the robot's legs flailed helplessly. The robot would have been able to get right back up if his partner didn't keep it in place for him with one arm and his tail tangled with the robot's. Knowing his teammate could not be that comfortable pinned by the machine, Tamaki tried his best to hurry over, and after a moment of arguing with himself about whether he was even strong enough to break the eye, Tamaki jammed the pipe he was given into the eye, shattering it almost instantly, and went straight through the robot's head. The robot stopped once Tamaki broke its eye, leaving him to wonder if the robots were as strong as he feared, because he wasn't very strong. Tamaki couldn't ponder this for long as his partner tossed the robot husk off to the side and shook himself before standing upright again. That did not weigh as much as I thought it would. We both should have 2 points now, his partner commented, rolling his shoulders. Then he moved to stand on 4 legs. Climb on. We only have 10 minutes to get points, he requested, reminding Tamaki of their time constraint. Right. Tamaki choked out as he awkwardly climbed onto the guy's back. Thank Kami, Mirio isn't here to see me, Tamaki thought, utterly red-faced because he could already hear the embarrassing jokes his best friend would have made at Tamaki's predicament. Most of the practical was a blur as they continued with a set routine. His partner would find or lure a robot away and drop him off to wrestle the machine so that Tamaki could stab it with the pipe. It was effective as they continued to mount up points which his partner kept track of, along with how much time they had left. Which Tamaki was very thankful, as between his general anxiety over their team up and the sheerly maddening embarrassment of riding his partner for most of the exam would have made it impossible for him. Occasionally they'd run into other examinees and Tamaki had tried to help them a couple of times, but after one girl snapped at him, Tamaki couldn't bring himself to try again after that. But as they reached the 2-minute mark, something happened that caused the ground to shake, and Tamaki watched in horror as a massive robot rose out of the ground and proceeded to knock down a 10-story building. His partner dragged Tamaki away as he had, unfortunately, froze in the face of the 0-pointer, and his mind was scrambled as he tried to think, but his mind simply couldn't comprehend anything other than the 0-pointer's rampage. However, through his panic, he heard someone cry out and his head snapped towards the sound, with his heart stopping upon seeing a girl pinned by some rubble. The girl was directly in the 0-pointer's path, and if that wasn't bad enough, Tamaki felt as if the world was in slow motion as a large chunk of build crumbled and was going to crush the trapped girl. The world tilted off its axis and Tamaki did something he never thought he would and ripped his wrist from his teammate's grip. Tamaki ran towards the girl as fast as possible, only slowing down once to grab a bite-sized bit of concrete, quickly swallowing it, and in the next second, Tamaki was standing over the girl. With the rubble about hit them both, and Tamaki quickly threw his arms up and desperately activated his quirk. He nearly collapsed and he painfully squeaked as he was hit with the full weight of the rubble, but Tamaki held it to the best of his ability, forcing most of his body to lock up when it turned to stone to keep them both from being hurt any further. But he was able to see the girl in the corner of his eye, and she stared up at him petrified with tears falling. Aye. She choked out before her reddish-brown eyes snapped to the side and she screamed. Tamaki turned his head and saw a decent-sized chunk of rubble sailing towards them fast. Tamaki swore his life flashed before his eyes, but before it could hit, a blur of black, white, and orange leapt at the chunk. Tamaki began to cry, utterly relieved upon watching his partner whack the rubble away with his tail. His teammate didn't waste a second and flipped the rubble off of Tamaki's back as soon as he was back on his feet. Tamaki collapsed to his knees after he released his quirk, having far past his limits to keep himself and the girl from being crushed. His partner grabbed the rubble trapping the girl and also tossed it away, then he got on all fours. Get on my back, his partner told them, and despite his body being shot, Tamaki grabbed the girl's wrist and scrambled onto the guy's back with the still shaking girl. As soon as Tamaki and the girl were secure, his partner took off with the zero-pointer hot on their heels. After a nerve-wracking minute, a loud alarm blared through the air and his partner stopped as President Mike announced the end of the exam. Tamaki felt like a weight had been removed from his chest and he took a deep breath as he tried to remember how many points they had collected. Was it 32 or 34? Tamaki wondered, but it was hard to focus with how light-headed he suddenly felt. He tried to step off of his partner's back, but his legs were like jelly and he was about to fall and hit the ground. However, someone caught him, but before he could see who it was, Tamaki's vision went black as he passed out.